Many Christians I've talked to say that the reason they are Christians is because of the validity of the Gospels. They claim that the Gospels are clear proof of Jesus' divinity and of the resurrection, because here we have 4 first-hand eyewitness accounts of these things. Furthermore, these accounts were written by different people in different places, and yet they agree with each other on many key ideas. This is clear evidence of their reliability and truth. This is a popular belief and argument among modern Christians, but it's simply not true. The Gospels were written by anonymous authors who never actually claimed to be eyewitnesses. Furthermore, the Gospels were written decades and even lifetimes after Jesus' death. Mark was written about 40 years after Jesus' death, Matthew about 60 years after, Luke about 70 years after, and John about 80 years after. Some sources put these dates even later. Furthermore, and here's the real kick in the teeth, the Gospel of Mark was the first Gospel written, and then Luke and Matthew were adapted from it, as well as the theoretical Q document, and possibly some oral traditions as well. This theory of the origin of these Gospels is the most widely accepted theory among biblical scholars. The Gospel of John is written very differently from the other 3 Gospels, and no one is quite sure who wrote it, although there is evidence that John is a composite work. The Gospel of John also contains many Gnostic elements, which is interesting given that the other Gospels have been rejected largely because of their Gnostic elements. All of that being said, it should now be clear that the Gospels are not 4 interconfirming accounts of Jesus' life and death. 2 of them are simply copies of and additions to one original account that was written by a non-eyewitness who wrote his account 40 years after the events it describes. The remaining Gospel, that of John, was written anonymously at least 80 years after Jesus' death, contains many Gnostic elements, and may also be a composite work. And finally, the original manuscript of Mark does not say anything about Jesus appearing to anyone after his resurrection. It simply says that Mary Magdalene saw the stone rolled away, and a young boy sitting in the tomb told her that Jesus had risen. And then it ends. Remember, this Gospel was the first one written, and it originally contained no account of Jesus' post-mortem appearances. One more thing. Over the course of history, the Gospels have been edited, added to, reworked, and reordered for various social and political reasons. For example, that line in John which says, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone," that was added 300 years after John was first written. And yet, Christians believe that the Gospels are clear proof of Jesus' divinity and of the resurrection. As a thought experiment, imagine your friend comes up to you and says that she and 3 other friends of yours saw aliens flying around, and then the aliens landed their spaceship and walked around. Would you believe her? Maybe. Now imagine that your friend didn't actually witness the event herself, and neither did your other friends. Instead, they read eyewitness accounts of these events in 2 different books, one from the 1840s and one from the 1880s. Well, not eyewitness accounts. In fact, your friends don't really know who wrote the books, nor do the authors ever claim to be eyewitnesses. Now imagine that the aliens are said to have landed in the year 1800, which means the first book was written a full 40 years after the event, and the second book was written at least 80 years after the event. Now imagine that the part of the story where the aliens landed and walked around was added in the 1850s, and was not part of the original story. Now imagine that your friends didn't actually read the original books. Instead, they read copies of copies of copies of the original books, and it was well known that these copies underwent many changes throughout the years, most notably the landing of the spaceship being added later. If all this were presented to you, would you believe that aliens really did land their spaceship and walk around in the year 1800? I don't think so. It is for these reasons that the Gospels are not good evidence of the divinity of Jesus or of the resurrection.